before it actually took out, I'd move my finger. Hello and welcome to the fifth presentation of the UWI Mona Western Jamaica Campus Research Seminar Series. I am Alpha Obika. This afternoon's presentation will be the second for Semester 2, an initiative of our campus director, Professor Donovan Campbell. The research seminar series is an activity geared towards providing a platform for faculty, students, and academics in the wider community to share their knowledge, ideas, and research. The presenter today is Kealey Dube, Assistant Professor in the School of Social Work at MacEwan University in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. She teaches a range of classes including leadership in human service organizations, social work ethics, and philosophy classes, field practicum, and mental health classes. MacEwan is an undergraduate university located in the downtown core and is a community-focused institution. A core tenet of her teaching philosophy is providing opportunities for students to work on projects that address a community need by working collaboratively with social service organizations. Prior to joining MacEwan University, she primarily worked with children, youth, and families, which has greatly shaped her teaching and research interests. She is passionate about inclusive education, experiential learning, and community-based social work practices. She has recently become fascinated by the intersection of artificial intelligence and post-secondary education, particularly in how artificial intelligence can be leveraged to enhance teaching, learning, and research. She will present on the topic developing simulation scenarios with students as active partners. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kealey Dube.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and I am thrilled to be here today in Jamaica and sharing a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing with some colleagues back home. So like was mentioned, MacEwan University is an undergraduate university in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and we have a population of students approximately getting close to 19,000. And we are very much on a growth trajectory. So we are looking at finding creative ways to build our programs and awesome, thank you. We are looking at creative ways in which we are bringing students in and able to support their journeys. We really feel strongly that university should be an inclusive place. It should be a place where students are able to discover about themselves, their passions, their ideas through mentorship with faculty and staff at the university. So we've already had a really wonderful introduction about MacEwan, so I'm gonna pause and happy to answer any questions about that after. I am gonna talk a little bit about a project that I worked on in collaboration with a variety of stakeholders at the university, primarily other professors, staff, but most importantly, 2 students. And this simulation experience was developed for a student in social work who initially had some challenges in their field education or experiential learning courses. And we thought about how can we support the student better? What can we be doing better to understand the barriers that they're facing, to understand the needs that they have, as we strongly believe that they would make a huge contribution to the profession of social work. And it was some of those inherent barriers in the experiential learning environment which were causing troubles for the student. They had done really well in their classes, They had initially had a degree and come back to do a social work degree. So academically and in the classroom systems, they did really well. It was that transition into an experiential learning environment that created some challenges for them. So we really wanted to be creative and to think about what this looked like. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, and happy to answer any questions as they may come. Okay, I just thought I'd share some photos. I intentionally chose photos initially without snow, and I think I might have one in here as well. So as you can see, MacEwan University is right in the downtown core. So it initially started off as a college about 70 years ago, and then it has really developed into a university. Primarily because of our location, we are embedded in an area of the city with a real range of income disparities. We are located in the business core, but we also have a core of folks who live in the inner city. And so it's really important to MacEwan that we think about our place and we honor the land on which we are learning and growing. And so you can see here in this first picture, this one right here, that is the main walkway, and we span about eight different city blocks. And so we're able to spend all of our time inside if we need to, especially in those cold winter days. But there is lots of opportunities to be outside and to be enjoying the beautiful area that is Edmonton. So I'm going to talk just really briefly about these guiding frameworks, and then I'm just to sort of land us on what were some of the values and what were some of the beliefs that informed what we were doing. I do have a reference list at the end, and I'll make sure my contact information is shared if folks want to continue on and connect. So like I had mentioned earlier, it was an experiential learning environment that created some challenges for the student. And like many of the programs that are offered all across the different universities right now, there is this real push to think about how do we translate our in-classroom learning to a learning in sort of a more real-world environment, where students are placed in different organizations, where they are learning, where they're being mentored. And it's an amazing learning opportunity. So in the School of Social Work, we call this our signature pedagogy. And I know many other programs do really wonderful experiential learning opportunities as well. We also know that there can be lots of barriers. And there's a couple of research studies here that I'm happy to send out to folks as well if they'd like to look at. But one of the research studies talks about how it's so much harder to think quickly on your feet. In a classroom setting, you have time to process the information, you have time to read, you have time to maybe watch a video about it. You have an opportunity to ask your professor some questions. But in a more experiential learning, you need to think on your feet, you need to be quick. And for some of our students, that can create a lot of nerves, that can create a lot of anxiety, a fear about getting things wrong. One of the things that the research has been talking a lot about is this discomfort with disclosing their different learning styles and how they're unsure how to do that. They're unsure if they will be labeled as maybe not a typical university student or they shouldn't be there, which we really want to challenge back against. We want to think about, again, how do we make university inclusive? And how do we support students with reaching their goals and also ensuring that they are meeting the learning objectives and the learning outcomes. So all the way through this program, or this project, I should say, that we talked about and we created, we really built on this idea that the student had an incredible amount of strengths, and regardless of the different ways that we could help them understand the materials, the ways they could demonstrate their knowledge, the ways we could really engage them. So a lot of those universal design for learning principles, the expectation was really clear. They had to meet the learning outcomes of the course, and they had to be able to demonstrate that. But as a program, we were focused on being flexible in how the student was able to highlight and share their knowledge. So you can see this study from 2024 looked at 21 different peer-reviewed articles and sort of summarized some of these challenges. And there's some that I've talked about already, right? The challenge around stigma around mental health, the reluctance to disclose how they learn best, what are some of their challenges have been, especially in a new environment where there is the expectation that they are there to apply their knowledge already. One of the things that the student really struggled with was what sort of accommodations would they need in order to be supported in the workplace environment. There was lots of accommodations that were available in the classroom. having an extension for written assignments, maybe writing an exam in a quieter area so that they could focus. But what would that actually look like when we translated it into a work environment or an experiential learning environment? So we wanted to explore that. We wanted to see what could help make this a successful experience for the student. So we leaned on universal design for learning, and that really became foundational to the work that we did. And we wanted to think about how do these key principles, especially the ones that we've circled in red, so being flexible, having learning opportunities that are straightforward, that are simple in their instructions and they're intuitive, have opportunities for students to be perceptible and to understand and to be able to make sense of the connections, but also to provide lots of opportunities and a tolerance for making mistakes. If I think back to some of my education in universities, there was lots of freedom to make mistakes. I could write a paper that didn't go well. I could do a test that maybe wasn't my best. And I think there's an increasingly amount of pressure in an experiential learning environment that you are not going to make mistakes. The consequences feel higher. They feel more impactful. And so we want to think about how do we, of course, protect the folks that the service users or the community members that are accessing these services, while also making sure that students know it is okay to make mistakes. That is part of the learning process. And so again, this project really leaned into our social work values. And I know these are not exclusive to social work, many of us share these, but really that pursuit of social justice, that foundational belief that there are systems or processes or histories that have impacted folks, and we want to think about education as being an opportunity to develop and grow and to provide a sustainable way of life for yourselves and your families and other people in your community. So, and it also linked into MacEwan's strategic vision, which is really thinking about as we become more aware of how diverse our population is, we want to think about a student body that represents that. We want to think about faculty that represent that diversity and creating inclusive learning environments where folks can be heard, be supported, and also be challenged to learn and grow and to develop some of the skills that we know are so important in a university setting. So I'm not going to talk a ton about this as well, but I just really wanted to highlight that those three sort of core principles of universal design for learning, so that multiple means of engagement. And in this project, we had a student who worked really closely with us to develop, we co-developed the simulations that they would run through and they would participate in order to build those skills in a scaffolded, meaningful way so that they could be successful in their practicum when they went to do it again. And so we really started off thinking about, what are you interested in? Asking the student those questions. What were some of the challenges you had? And the student came up with some really great ideas. They wanted to be able to introduce themselves. They wanted to talk about what their needs were for learning, what their strengths were, what they were hoping to develop in their practicum. And they also wanted to talk about being really upfront with the supervisor. This is how I learn, and this is the kind of feedback that I can take. And so being really transparent in that was a skill they wanted to work on. And they also really wanted to work on, how do you answer questions when somebody calls? This particular environment the student was going into was going to involve parents of children calling into the organization he was with and asking questions. And he wanted to work on how does he respond in a professional way. So that multiple means of engagement became really important. In terms of the multiple means of representation, this is again where we thought, how do you learn best? And he was able to talk about a real love for sort of some online games and online virtual world experiences. And so we thought, let's do our best to leverage that. And we thought about recording the simulations that he was participating in on his own cell phone, so we didn't have to worry about how we were storing the data or anything like that. He owned that, it was on his cell phone. And then we were able to watch it back, and he was able to see all of his strengths and what he was doing really well. And I'll talk about that a little bit more down the road. And then the multiple means of expression. How could he show us that he was learning? How could he demonstrate that he actually knew these skills? And again, I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go. But the piece that I think is really important and that I've become incredibly passionate about is understanding the potential that a universal design for learning foundational sort of base or approach has for supporting increasingly diverse groups of students who have a variety of different needs. And the other piece around this that was really exciting for us to participate in is, and which really came from one of the collaborators who we worked with, was this guiding framework around students as partners. So many of us, if we work in a university setting, will get feedback from students at the end of the semester about what worked well, what would they change, and then we can incorporate that into our classes moving forward. A students as partners framework goes extensively beyond that, and it thinks about having students playing a really active role. What is important for them to be learning, right? How are they going to be doing that? What sort of different means and opportunities are available? How do they want to be assessed? Do they want to be thinking about being involved in the community? Do they want to be thinking about writing papers, doing poster presentations, and weaving all of these skills in? And I really love this quote here that talks about pedagogy as a reflective process, better done with students rather than entirely in advance of them arriving to a class or a program. And so throughout this creation of these simulations, we really spent a lot of time, again, thinking about what do you want to be doing, right? How do you want to be learning? And I think we carried this through. So I'll jump ahead to a little bit of some of the impacts, and I'll jump back because I think it fits here. But for myself and my colleagues who work at the university, this students as partners is a philosophy that we adopt into the work that we do. And really you're mindful around the power dynamics, and so having the opportunity for the students to be really meaningful partners, to think about how are they contributing, to think about how everyone's voices are equal in the discussion. And one of the ways that we did this was we were able to publish a paper, which will be released in May, I believe. It's been accepted and we're just waiting for the journal to release it. And we actually put both students as lead authors on the paper to really show our commitment about their knowledge and their wisdom that they were able to bring into this project. Okay, so here's a picture of us. And I'll just highlight the two students in the center there, were the students who participated in the simulation. And so one of the students was a social work student who we had built this project with and around. And the other student was a drama student who we connected with as a way for them to be the actor in the simulation. So it was really exciting for us that we were able to work across programs, and we were able to think about this really benefits the acting student as well, the drama student, because they could develop and practice their skills in this acting in this simulation, as well as having the social work student obviously participate in this as a social worker. So when we go back to thinking about the students as active partners, it really started right from the beginning. And so we thought about involving people together. When I was working with the student, I really talked to him about who do you want to have involved? He already had some supports at the university, so we pulled that person in. I asked him if we could pull in someone who has a lot of experience working with students with disability in a post-secondary context, so we pulled her in. We had teaching support, so somebody who helps us develop our teaching pedagogy and strategies. She came in as well because she could help oversee and scaffold and think about the pedagogical components of this project. And then he met with the drama student, felt like it was going to be a really good fit, and so we included him in as well. So this full participation in all of our meetings really allowed us to create a brave space where we could say, I think this is going well, let's do more of that. Or you know what, this isn't actually on the track that we want to go, let's think about what we need to change. So the two scenarios that we developed in response to both our understanding and assessment of the students' need for growth and their areas of interest, so back to that UDL perspective again, was this first one of identifying areas for personal and professional growth and applying foundational knowledge and skills required for general social work practice. These are two of our learning outcomes in the course the student was participating in, and as I said before, they need to be able to meet these learning outcomes in order to pass the course, but the way we can get there can be really creative, it can be really student-centered, it can be really supportive and innovative. So we created these 2 simulation scenarios, and we sort of walked through a variety of steps. So the first step we did was we always met on a Friday afternoon, and the first step was a sort of a briefing or a connection, right? It was a reminder about what are our roles, talking again about the confidentiality agreement we have amongst us, so setting the tone for the work we were going to do. Thinking about how long are we going to be spent, so some of the logistics in terms of the scenario and the simulation, and really doing our very best, although we did do it at the university, to think about what would the environment look like. How can we mimic that? We set up the camera on the student's cell phone, and then we sort of all dove into our roles. And primarily it was the student and both students. The social work student was there as a social worker. They were pretending they were in their practicum. And then we had the drama student who took on a variety of roles. Sometimes they were the supervisor for the student, other times they were a parent calling in. So we talked a lot around what are the emotions, what was coming up for you when you were doing this? As you can imagine, for lots of us when we're learning new things, it was anxiety, it was nerves, it was I'm uncertain about what to do. One of the pieces that I think went really well and was a game changer from my perspective was when we watched back the videos, we watched them together as a group, and we highlighted the pieces that the student did well. So there was, of course, moments where things were choppy or things didn't flow, or maybe the question was off the topic. But our intention was very much, let's think about what you did well, with the belief that what we focus on grows. And by doing that, the student was able to develop a lot more confidence. They were able to see themselves and to recognize, this is how I'm holding my body, for example. And so when we think about interviewing people, when we think about connecting and the importance of nonverbal communication, he was able to sort of reconfigure what his body may look like in that meeting. And so the first setting was, again, with that field supervisor, like I mentioned earlier, thinking a little bit about introducing himself, talking about how he believes practicum can be successful for him, getting a clear idea about what are the expectations. In experiential learning, there's often, or can be, lots of times unspoken rules. We don't really know, do we take breaks often? Do we always take lunch at the same time? All of these sorts of nuances in organizations that we all learn about as we go. But for some students, this can be really overwhelming. And so having a lot of that clarity was really important. So in that first scenario, they talked about the students' roles. They talked about this, he asked questions about the supervisor's responsibilities for them and what was their style of providing feedback. He was able to find language that worked for him to share who he was holistically so that the supervisor had some idea about how to play to his strengths and how to support him. And the time it took for this entire conversation, the first time was 11 minutes. And so in that 11 minutes, when we watched the video back, there was many strengths, right? He tried to ask the questions, he engaged, he was very, very much interested in this. But we also noticed that there was lots of times it was hard for him to understand what he wanted to say. He would oftentimes get stuck in his own head, as he would say, and sort of rotate through and not be able to find the language for this. He would have a hard time tracking the conversation. And so, for example, knowing what to ask next or what would be an appropriate follow-up question. And so when we were watching the video back, we focused on identifying those strengths, what he did really well, and then we were also able to think about what are some strategies you can use. Can we break down and make yourself some, we don't like to use the word cheat notes in an academic setting, but some like strategies that you can write out and you can have with you so that you're able to respond to them. What are some notes? We talked about how do we regulate ourselves, right? How do we stay calm and centered in a professional setting? And then we tried the exact same scenario again. And you can see he went from 11 minutes to 9 minutes to 6 minutes. And by the time we got to 6 minutes, he was clear, his body language was open and relaxed. He was able to recognize when maybe he would tighten up, and then you could actually see him in the video, how he was able to compensate and relax and re-engage in the conversation. And so it was a tremendous amount of skills that he learned in that time. He developed skills for conversation. He developed different sorts of notes and strategies that he would use. He was able to remain really focused on what the point of the conversation was. So that was a huge learning, and not only did we have the content really improve for him in this conversation, but his confidence and his ability to feel that he can engage really meaningfully in this work also increased. So once we felt like this was reasonable, he got where he wanted to go, and again, this is led by him, right? We're thinking about students as partners. This is his learning, this is his growth, his journey, and so we wanted to be able to support him in what that looked like. The second scenario was much more focused on actually the development of social work skills. So he was nervous that coming into the practicum, he wouldn't be able to engage with people in a meaningful way, and then that would reflect poorly on him, or it would make him nervous, or he wasn't sure what to do. So again, we thought about the organization he was at was the Autism Society of Edmonton, and we envisioned that in collaboration with them, so we knew he was going there for practicum, and we asked, like, what are some conversations parents call in with, right? Why would they be asking for support for you? We wrote out a script. We were able to make it as clear as possible. And again, thinking about that scaffolded approach. So we know it's obviously not going to follow this script in real life, but it is that learning the skills and then learning how to be flexible with things that are unknown coming after. So we had the drama student call in as a parent who was frustrated, who was feeling overwhelmed, who was looking for some support for their child. And then again, we developed a script that he could respond with. And as he practiced these scenarios, he was able to put it into his own words. He was able to find his own language that made sense to him. And again, using some of those same strategies he'd used before, like the different sorts of notes, having an opportunity to be regulated, developing a script to say to the parent, I actually don't know the answer to this right now. I'm going to talk to my supervisor and I'm going to come back and get in contact with you again. So that also helped him to relax and to be really meaningful and engaged in the conversation. And so you can see here that the script we did this one formally twice. And the first time we had a parent who, although they were frustrated, they were generous and kind and not challenging at all in their engagement with the student. The second scenario, we decided to amp it up a little bit. And so the parent was really frustrated, asked more difficult questions, was not as responsive. And you can still see that he went from 11 minutes to 6 minutes, and we've made the situation more challenging. And so by the time he was finished this, he had a really clear idea about what his role was, what he was supposed to be doing, and the confidence just grew within him as well. So I have just added a couple photos here. So these are all at MacEwan University. We did this with basically no budget. We didn't have any money to hire anyone initially. We were able to get a grant for the drama student, but he was prepared to do this as a volunteer, and so there was no additional funding that went into this. There was no room costs or anything else. It was just a whole bunch of people coming together to think about how can we support the student, and if this works, can we build this out to something else that is going to support other people? So in this first video here in the circle, you can see that is the student who he is answering phone calls with the supervisor, who is the drama student in the second video there, who's, in this one, he's role-playing the role of a parent. And then what my job was too was to just sit and to observe and to really identify those strengths, so that when we watched back on the video, I would say, let's go to 3 minutes and 20 seconds because you did something really amazing there. And then when he saw that, he would want to do more of that. If he got stuck, I was able to provide that direct mentorship, that direct support, and maybe slide him a note or a question to ask to keep the conversation moving. So these are some results from this first round of the scenarios and the simulations that we did. And so you remember the first goal of this, scenario number 1, was identifying areas for personal and professional growth. He felt comfortable with the situation. I think primarily he will talk about because he was so involved in the whole entire process. He felt that this mimicked a real-world experience. Initially, he was unsure. He was like, is this actually going to feel like the work I'm going to be doing? In reflection, he said it did. He learned to be clear and express his questions with clarity and concise. And he learned that when he believed he was freezing, we actually didn't see that. And so challenging that belief that he's not doing a very good job, he was able to observe that on the video and then to understand what was happening. One of the big pieces I think he learned was to recognize and use body language as an eye contact in ways to improve communication. And he sort of rated the learning experience when he first went. He thought, I think I did like a 6 out of 10 if he was to grade himself. And at the end, he'd give himself an 8 out of 10. When we think about the scenario number 2, these are really focused on some of those core social work skills, which we all believe we need a relationship for. We need the foundation and the ability, like I said earlier, to make mistakes, to learn and to grow in an experiential learning environment. So he learned how to ask open and closed questions in ways that were friendly, that didn't feel as robotic. He practiced these skills over and over and over again until they felt like they were second nature to him. He learned how to take notes. He learned how to use a variety of tools and strategies in order to facilitate this conversation. And ultimately, which was our goal, was that he felt much more prepared to go into his practicum again. So this is the debrief. You can see there's a lot of us in this room together. We all have a passion for this. And you could see here the student was really sharing his emotions, what he thought he did really well. And then one of the pieces that I think was so impactful was he was able to identify, ooh, that didn't go well. Or, well, when I held my arms like that, it really looked like I wasn't engaged in the conversation. Or when he was struggling to find the words, I just was thinking over and over again what I should say. And so he was able to see that played back for him and to recognize the impact of that on the relationship, and then we were able to develop those strategies. The drama student was really great. He was able to share, this is what it felt like to be the person. I didn't notice that it was awkward, or yeah, that felt a little bit awkward, let's try it again. And then myself and my other colleagues, we guided the debrief with lots of these reflection questions, highlighting what went well, and other people were able to provide their feedback as well. So I'll zip back to that, and I'll end on that, but I wanted just to say some of our next steps for this project. So after the project wrapped up, it was a year ago, we were all able to write a paper, and that paper will be released soon. The student and both students presented at Student Research Day at MacEwan. We also had the social work student as one of the staff members presented at a national conference on this project, thinking about how students can be active partners and really take charge of their learning, of course, with mentorship and support from faculty. Some of our next steps, we are looking at ongoing collaborations with the drama program. So when I get back to Canada shortly, we will be having some meetings about how can we continue to provide opportunities for drama students and theater students to practice their skills in simulation, while also providing really meaningful experience for social work students. And some colleagues and I are currently working on developing a proof of concept with our computing science partners around using artificial intelligence for simulations. But I will leave you with this reflection from the student. His name is Dennis. And at the end of the series of simulations, this is what he said. So this collaborative experience allowed me to be included in everything. It was good and I felt valued. I believe the outcome was more positive because I was involved. I am more prepared for my practicum than last year. My involvement in this work made me aware of how students with disabilities can be supported in university, and the skills and learning can hopefully help other students too. So I will leave you with that, and thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions or anything you may have.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Dube, for that very enlightening presentation. The topic, developing simulation scenarios with students as active partners. So we have about 20 minutes for some discussion. I will invite Professor Dube back to the microphone. I will have a roving microphone where I will take any questions or comments that you have.
Thank you.
Okay, so who will start the ball rolling? All right.
Thank you, Kealey, for such a wonderful presentation. I have a question here. How do you evaluate learning outcomes for students under simulation scenarios?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for this particular scenarios, we did it based on a variety of factors. We did it based on what the student was able to reflect on. And we were also thinking about what were we able to see. So were we able to identify the specific skills that we were looking for? We take our learning objectives and then we break them down into specific goals. So for this one, this happened actually outside of a particular classroom, and then it led him into practicum where it was formally evaluated. And so his field instructor, as well as the faculty liaison, were able to evaluate these. And we were able to just sort of identify, was he asking open-ended questions? Was he asking closed questions? Did he follow the conversation? Was he doing summarizing? So some of those key social work skills we were able to identify and evaluate if he met.
Thank you. I just have one final question.
Of course.
What would be some of the pros and cons of using AI in role plays for students? I know you're passionate about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a new passion of mine for sure. So, I think that I think one of the benefits of this potentially could be that we could just increase accessibility, right? If we could have AI and online simulations be available to students, they can do them in their own time. They can do them if they're early morning risers, if they're working late at night. They can do them repeatedly, so they could practice them over and over and over again. So it could, I'm hoping, increase accessibility for folks. And I think with AI, we're just thinking a little bit still and learning about how does it have that human connection? What does that look like? And are they able to get that feedback mechanism? So to be determined, we're sorting that out as we go. Thank you.
All right. While we wait on another question, I have one for you. I think it's very fascinating, the research that you've embarked on with your colleagues. I like that it's interdisciplinary. I had a question the selection of 2 students. I wanted to get a sense of how they were selected, and then did the researchers have an issue with the fact that the sample size is pretty small, or were you all not concerned about it?
Yeah, great question. So the particular student, the social work student, was identified because he had challenges in his practicum. And so we were trying to think a little bit about how can we best support him. And so this whole project was really developed around his learning needs as a way to support him being successful when he took the practicum course again. So he was a good fit for that, obviously. And then with the drama student, we just had some collaborative discussions with our colleagues in the theater program. And they identified this student and they said, we think he would be great. At this point, it was still a volunteer opportunity. And so we met with him and he agreed to do this. And he sort of self-selected himself. If he hadn't have been interested, we would have looked for somebody else, but he was just like the absolute perfect fit. Yeah, I think in terms of the sample size, we do have to continue to expand this to see, is this going to be effective on a larger scale? We are hoping that when students are experiencing challenges in practicum, this can be something that we can add to support them, or if we think they'll have challenges going into a more advanced practicum or experiential learning course, that this could be something that they could trial out as well, and then we'll continue to get results and build and tweak as we need to.
Excellent. I don't want it to dominate. I want to ask any other questions? Go ahead.
Hi, Kealey. Lovely presentation. I noticed that you said that the drama students, they did it voluntarily. Is there any way that maybe they could get credit for this, kind of, it's a student activity for, in the future, if that's a thing that you could collaborate with your faculty with them?
Absolutely, yeah. Every once in a while you get a real gem, right? And things just work out. And I think this was an example of that. Both students were lovely, but the drama student was so generous with his time and sharing of his knowledge. And so that is our hope when we go back, that we'll be able to formalize this. We can say, like, this worked really well, and I didn't put the drama student's quote in here, but he really shared how it expanded his own understanding about how theater can be used to support folks with disabilities, or to think about the role of theater in social justice, and what does that look like. So he was really impacted by this as well. So absolutely, that's our hope, that we'll be able to formalize it and have it live in both of our classes. It's just going to take us a little bit of time to get the logistics sorted, but that's our hope for sure. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, we have another question.
Hi, thank you for your presentation today. Very engaging. We in nursing, we do quite a bit of simulation. So it's really touching the points to engage us here. Engage me particularly about simulation. You mentioned that your student was a student with disabilities. Could you identify exactly what type of disability the student would have had?
Yeah.
And how did you approach the simulation differently than you would for a student who would not have said that they would have had a disability? How did you approach the simulation differently?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yeah, so I'm happy to share. The student has actively shared, so I'm happy to share about his diagnosis. So I really became involved when the first time he was in an experiential learning opportunity, it didn't go well, and he withdrew from that course. And so that's when I became involved. And at that point, there actually was no diagnosis. He had been connected with our access and disability resources, and there may have been an ADHD diagnosis at that time, I'm not sure. But it was something that he had really felt wasn't impacting him. And I think through that initial experience, he thought perhaps this was something he wanted to explore. And so on his own and with the support of his family, he went and explored it, and he came back with a diagnosis of autism. And he had done really well academically. It was those social skills that, some of those soft skills. And so I think for this, in terms of the second part of your question about how we approached it, we really, again, one of my colleagues had done a lot of work with disability, so she was there and able to lead some of these discussions. But I think the pacing that we broke it down into like small components so he could see the success that he had. He could try things over and over again. I think watching the videos back was incredibly impactful, because we could say, and we often would say in class, open body language when we're talking in Canada, and we understand what that means in our heads, but it's way different when we see ourselves on video doing that. So he was able to make those connections. I would still do that with all students, to be honest. So I think that I think we could take some of these same approaches and use this across the board. I will say there was a lot of support in this, in terms of just reminding each other, why are we here at the beginning of the simulation, focusing ourselves on that, and then focusing on those soft skills was one of the pieces that was different, perhaps. Yeah, thanks.
Fascinating research. I know in working with students, there are always issues, ethical concerns that you all have to go through, like approval, and were there ethical issues that arose during the process?
Yeah, it was a great question. And so we talked to our ethics department at MacEwan, and we were able to work with them to find a way for him to be supported and to be able to do this work. So because he was leading this and we were involved with this, we didn't have to have a huge ethics application at the start, but we did do consent forms, we did talk about confidentiality, and then we've moved into having a more robust process in order to disseminate that information and for the paper. The biggest piece was that we wanted to be able to record the videos, but he needed to record it, and then he deleted it directly after the scenarios, because it did have the acting student on there as well. And although he had written and given his consent for that, I think collectively as a team, we just felt best that we would delete those videos. But he owned them. They were on his cell phone. We weren't storing that information anywhere. And because he was such an active participant in this and really leading this, he was able to direct the the direction we went with the scenario topics and how we met and who was involved.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. We have any more questions from the floor? Yes, I mean.
Hi, wonderful presentation. Thank you. I was just curious, did you find that there were other students who would have been interested in the simulation given the work that they would have seen you done with these two students?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We definitely had some students who were interested in that. And that's why we're hoping that we're able to build it out more. We have at MacEwan, our nursing department has a fabulous simulation lab. And I always look jealously at it as I walk by. So we're hoping that that could be a potential partnership. But really, we did this just sort of in our office, in our student spaces. So we would absolutely love to do this with more students.
Yeah, so wonderful presentation. You mentioned that you did not have a budget, but students were able to receive grants. So in what ways would it have affected you for having a lack of financial resources in carrying out the research?
Yeah, we had to be incredibly creative. So we had to just think a little bit around who was involved, I think, primarily. The biggest concern we had without having a budget was how would we get the drama student or the acting student to play this. And so initially, like I said, they were interested in just doing this as a volunteer. And then one of our colleagues was able to find a grant, and so we were able to pay him for his time. But I think, the biggest one is who is going to be in the room and how do we need to compensate them for their time and their wisdom. And so we were really lucky that I think all of us felt this could fit into our pre-existing roles already in the university. And then we were able to just develop it through our collaborative nature. So there was quite a few of us, as you can see. There's 6 of us in the picture, so it spread the work out quite a bit, and it was manageable for us. Yeah, thank you.
So, me again.
Yes, hi.
I see you give a lot of perspective on the path of the student. Was there any plans to get the teachers or the lecturers' perspective on this engagement that you had?
Yeah.
Is that a future plan for you, or was it captured in the research that you would have done already?
Yeah, it was captured in the research. So the social work student was actually in a class that I teach. So I got to know him quite well through some of those classes and through the field experience as well. And then we did have also the feedback from the field instructors and from his faculty liaison after he did the practicum. So we absolutely captured their information as well, and they really felt he did well, he was successful, he was meeting the goals. Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yes, of course.
When he went into the actual practicum, what was his response? Did he feel a little bit more comfortable? Was he king of the world in doing the practicum? What was the outcome?
Yeah, thank you. And one thing that I should have mentioned, which I didn't, was that part of what we were able to do through some funding he had through some of the disability supports was we were able to hire like a social emotional coach who could come with him to practicum, just like a little bit at the time, again, to help sort of scaffold and build that confidence, but also to have, he was a person who the student could come to and say, oh, I don't know what to do about this, and he'd be able to provide that feedback. What we actually found was he didn't really need the coach. After he got settled into the practicum, he really found that he could develop those relationships with folks, and he didn't need to use a coach as much as we had perhaps initially thought. And so, yeah, he did well. Like, he did well. They had no major concerns. I will say that the community partner was well aware we were doing these simulations, and they were involved way earlier, knowing that they were going to have the student come to do their practicum. So they were supportive, they were welcoming. It was an organization who works with folks with neurodiversity, and so it was a great first fit for him. He's actually just finishing his senior practicum in a really busy school setting with no additional supports. And he was just interviewed for an article about being really successful in practicum. So he's done exceedingly well. And he's worked really hard for it, yeah.
Right. Thanks. I came in a little bit late, but I'm just considering your presentation and your research is directed at the university level, but do you see this as something that can be replicated at other levels, say the primary and, you know, that kind of, the simulation as a vehicle for the students to improve?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. And not one I've actually like given a ton of thought to, so you're putting me on the spot and I'll try to think. Yeah, I think so for sure, right? I think if we think about being really intentional with some of in the primary grades around play, right? And how would we model this and how would we have some of those? Yeah, I think the sky's the limit, right? If we're passionate about it and we have these interests, I think we could look at doing that, yeah.
Thank you, and our campus director, who is currently viewing the session live, is very, very much intrigued by all that you have said. He wanted to get a sense of how you developed a passion for this type of training and research. You know, what was the source of it? And I also want to get a sense of where next. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So probably ties back to, you know, I think recognizing, I do really strongly believe that education is a vehicle to facilitate change. And I also think that when I first started university, it was incredibly overwhelming and hard to find my own footing around what did that look like. And I can really clearly remember some professors who took the time to get to know me as a person. But I think and so that's sort of what led me to think about how can I have my classroom social work practice mirror lots of the values around inclusivity and valuing diversity and lots of voices in the classroom. How can I provide value to that and amplify that, just as I would do in my own social work practice? So I think that was it. But I think before I've had some like experiences with, you know, family members who have needed a little bit of extra support, and it's really, I'm able to see what a difference it makes. And I think really truly our systems can be, you know, they're not always as flexible as we would like, but when we can be flexible and creative, we can really see people shine. And getting to know the students, you just see how much they bring to the classroom and also how much challenges some of them have and how much they're balancing in their lives. And I want to provide as many opportunities as them to be successful as I can, so yeah.
Fascinating, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's give our feature presenter a special round of applause. You've been very engaging and accommodating, and I know the conversations will continue after the session has ended. You are now part of the UE family, UE WJC family. So we have a special token of appreciation to give to you that will be handed out by our very own Miss Alethea Campbell.
Good afternoon. I must say that this presentation has resonated with me, especially since you said that education is a vehicle for change, and regardless of who, where, or what, everyone deserves a voice, and we really look forward to these simulation scenarios and how they will be not only helping those in Edmonton, but also Canada at large, Caribbean, and the world. Thank you so much, Kealey. We look forward to seeing the success of this venture.
Thank
Here you
you.
go,
Thank
as a
you so
token
much.
of our appreciation.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Most welcome.
So thank you so much once more on behalf of our campus director, Professor Campbell, and all our colleagues, staff, and students. We really do want to thank you for sharing your time, your energy, your knowledge with us. And who knows, maybe there will be room for us to collaborate in the near future. Thank you very much. So I know we have viewership online, and we also want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of our session. The WJC seminar series continues in April, and it promises to be a very productive one. Ladies and gentlemen, do have a wonderful day.